Welcome back to Invest Global. Today we're discussing Georgia versus Armenia offshore banking opportunities. Now, after spending time in both of these countries and going through the experience of setting up multiple accounts, both business and personal, I really understand a bit better of the process actually being boots on the ground versus, people that just try and research, okay, how can I set these things up without actually going there? So first of all, highly recommend visiting both countries, even if you're not interested in setting up a bank account. My question is, why wouldn't you be, right? So the beautiful thing about both these countries and kind of why I'm contrasting them, first of all, neighbors. Second of all, they're both non-CRS countries, so non-common reporting standard countries. Obviously, if you're a U.S. citizen, right, like if you're a U.S. taxpayer, you still have to understand that FATCA is always part of the equation. So with FATCA, obviously, it kind of trumps the CRS, right? It trumps the common reporting standard. So keep that in mind throughout this video. None of this is financial or tax advice. Always consult with a professional, or if you're curious on anything, you can actually email us. We have an email down below in the description. One of the members of the team can get back to you on that if you just have any personal questions. But the main thing to understand here with both Georgia and Armenia, and the reason that they're both non-CRS countries, but the other interesting thing I thought of is both the currencies, which if you look at just the historical currency chart, obviously if you're going, Dram, the Armenian currency, or Lari to USD, they're actually very comparable charts. Both of them in 2014 had that massive drop, and it's been relatively stagnant since then. And when you kind of have these multitude of factors, then you go, okay, the ease of opening an account is very, very easy, right? in these situations, that's why I find it interesting to actually compare these opportunities, because so many people just go, okay, these are the pros. It's only like sunshine and rainbows when it comes to opening an account. But if you have to choose between the two, that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about today. Basically, at the beginning of this video, I'll be laying out some objective facts, kind of the overall numbers as far as like macro indicators of the countries, debt to GDP, population, which population is relatively comparable. So Armenia has around 3 million people, and Georgia, I think it's like around 3.75 million people, rough estimate. But yeah, I'll be talking about debt to GDP, looking at inflation rates, interest rates of these bank accounts, because both of them are very compelling opportunities for interest rates. In the U.S., you see ridiculously low interest rates that you're basically being eaten up by inflation if you just are holding your capital in a bank account stagnant. Michael Saylor describes this really, really well as kind of a melting ice cube. So in countries like this, yes, you have much higher, or at least reported inflation than you do in the U.S., but there's many other factors to consider, and other things as far as in expansion of the money supply, especially when it's a global reserve currency. Over the past year, it's been pretty insane what's been going on there. But again, for a whole nother video, basically I'll be talking about some of these key indicators, and then at the end, my opinion on kind of contrasting these two. So let's hop into the macro indicators. All right, starting off with a higher populated country, Georgia. When you're looking at GDP and debt to GDP, it's very important to understand that none of these numbers are exact. When you're looking kind of at these global macro indicators, it's much more to gain kind of a mental map, like a bird's eye view on the market as far as, okay, what's the trajectory of the economy? And these are kind of the main things that I like to look at. So GDP in Georgia is right around $16 billion with a debt to GDP of 62%. Very important to understand. Contrast that with Armenia, a little bit below. So it's like $12.5 billion as far as GDP goes, and then debt to GDP is right around 42%. Now, when you move on to something that I also like to look at, just as, like I said, trajectory of the country, unemployment rates, very comparable. Obviously, since Georgia has a higher population, you could say that this makes sense, but Georgia's right around 18% unemployment, Armenia's right around 17% unemployment. Then you're going to, okay, inflation and interest rates. Now, Georgia, a bit higher for both of these clearly, but both of them essentially break even. Armenia, it's literally the exact same. So Georgia, it's like interest rates are right around 9.5%, and inflation's right around 10% in the Georgian Lari. When you're looking at Armenia with the Dram, you're looking at interest rates of right around 6.5%, and basically the exact same with inflation. So 6.5% for both there. So I hope that at least gives you a little bit of a better objective view on these countries. Obviously, you can do your own research, but moving on besides that, ease of opening an account. Now, the reason that I start off with this first is it's something long-term, personally, I'm not that interested in, if you plan to bank in these countries for a long time, right? So it's really that first step, right? So it's the barrier to entry. So if a country, has a ton of paperwork, you have to do all these different things just to actually set up the account. There's a kind of a moat around it, and it has a lot of friction, right? Both these countries are pretty frictionless, but relative when you're just contrasting them to each other, not on the global landscape, just Georgia versus Armenia. I would say Georgia is much easier to open an account. In my experience, around half an hour to open up an account. Very, very simple. Literally got both the cards the next day. The one thing that I'll talk about kind of in the next section is the consolidation in Georgia of the banks versus and kind of their growth, which I'll get to that in a second, versus Armenia. But in Armenia, it takes around, just to get an approved for an account, around a day. That was my experience. Obviously, if you have different things, it depends on your personal cases, right? If you have like a criminal background, completely different story. But as long as you have a clean record and all these different things, and you're pretty straightforward of a person, you have nothing to hide, you can get accepted very, very easily, right? So Georgia, again, you can literally do it within the day, get the card the next day. Armenia, a little bit longer, but still both very, very simple to do. So next, the kind of thing that I wanted to talk about is the trajectory of these banks, right? So how has the growth been? And in Georgia, it's been a little bit non-organic. In Armenia, in my opinion, it's been a bit more organic. Now, what do I mean by this? So I recently made a video on HDFC Bank, which is an Indian banking stock, and I like India as far as the banking sector goes because you see all these demographic numbers. Basically, you have pretty much the highest fertility rate, massive population growth year over year, and much beating out, U.S., China, Russia. So this bank, HDFC Bank, has been complete non-organic growth, which again, not saying that this is a bad thing because it's very strategic, right? So mergers and acquisitions where you're purchasing up other companies that essentially will help support this individual company is very, very powerful, right? So HDFC Bank has done this, and so has the top Georgian banks. Really, the top two Georgian banks, it's like they take up 75%. So when you're looking at this, that's a consolidation. So I always like to say, okay, belt and suspenders, right? So no single point of failures. I grew up in Iowa in the United States, a farming state, and it was always interesting because that's kind of the concept, right? Is if you have a single point of failure, if you only have one bank, so first of all, if you just have one bank in one country, your home country, that's a definite single point of failure. But then beyond that, okay, so you can have multiple bank accounts in one country, still single point of failure because you have political risk going for you. Ideally, you move out of that country, you're able to bank globally or internationally, whatever you want to call it, and in each of these countries, having multiple bank accounts set up, because all of them have they have human error risks, right? So you have to understand that every human is no human is infallible, essentially, right? So you want to have kind of all of these as decentralized as possible, in my opinion. Now, obviously, this is, like I said, not financial advice, but I think if you're looking at this and going, hey, one account in a country versus three accounts in a country, I would much rather opt for three accounts in a country, especially if the ease of opening an account is pretty low, right? So as far as this goes, when you're looking at it, like I said, organic versus non-organic growth, Armenia is much, much more organic. Not a lot of these banks are doing mergers and acquisitions, pretty organic, especially Avoca Bank. I love what they're doing, very, very future-focused, very focused on, I would say, they kind of actually beat out Georgia as far as fintech platform goes. There's so many different things you can do. Armenia, basically, just as far as like deposit for interest rates goes on an account, it's right around 10% just starting off, and obviously that's in the local currency, so that's in Dram. Georgia, it's a little bit lower, but still very comparable as far as those go. So I talked about ease of opening an account. Next is kind of this, as I was talking about, is the consolidation. So in Georgia, like I said, it's like the top two banks, which really TBC Bank, and I guess you could say the Bank of Georgia, not a private bank, public bank, but these two banks, it's like 75% in terms of the total market dominance. And when you're looking at Armenia, it's different because basically those 9 banks all together take up that same 75%. And obviously, again, rough numbers here, but Armenia is a bit more decentralized in this manner, where Georgia is a bit more centralized. Now, obviously, as decentralized as you can get, I hope you understand what I'm talking about here. I actually talk a lot about on this channel about decentralized finance. I do a daily series called Daily DeFi, talking more about blockchain and cryptocurrency innovation. So in the vacuum of centralized finance, as decentralized as you can get, as far as like outside of the banks, just looking at, okay, what are the total amount of banks in the country that are kind of separated, right? So that's, for me, Armenia is a little bit more compelling. Again, Georgia, I would say ease of opening accounts a bit better, as far as that goes. But besides that, I mean, they're very comparable. I highly recommend both if the option is both. Personally, I guess I would say, I'm much more interested in the future banking, so I do like Avoca Bank as far as that goes. There's also Armenia Bank in Armenia, not Armenia Bank, but Armenia Bank, highest balance sheet, I'm pretty sure, in Armenia, if I remember correctly. And the other thing that I do have to say in both these countries that I love is you don't just have to have the local currency. You can actually have currency diversification. So you can hold the Russian rubles. You can hold, depending on the bank and depending on your type of account, you can hold things like Japanese yen. You can hold pounds. You can hold US dollars. All these different things. So it is compelling. And keep in mind, obviously, with these interest rates, it's in the domestic or local currency. So Georgia, Lari, Armenia, the Dram. So that's basically all for this one. I'm curious what you guys think. What do you like better, Armenia or Georgia? I, again, highly recommend visiting both countries and at least setting up one account, right? So like I said, better to have no single point of failure. So at least yeah, one account, ideally two accounts, but that way you're able to understand a little bit better and kind of raise your curiosity level. Another nice thing is that they really don't have, if you just want to set up an account and not even like park a ton of capital in it, you just want to test it out, you can do this. Obviously there are fees, but they're very, very minimal, especially, it's all dynamic based on how much capital you're dealing with, but the fees are basically 0 to none, in both countries. So that's all for this video. Again, if you liked it, hit the like button down below, subscribe to the channel, stay up to date, hit the notification bell, and click all. We talk about all things global investing on this channel, not just investing capital, but also investing your time in different markets. Currently here in beautiful Warsaw, Poland. That's all for this one. Again, like, subscribe, button all. Join the Telegram group, link down below in the description. Also, you can follow or leave us a question in the comments. That's all for this one. Invest global, and until next time.